The original Armored Core PS1 trilogy by FromSoft. The first Armored Core, 1997. Project Phantasma, only 5 months after the original game's release in Japan the same year, and 1998 everywhere else. Master of Arena, only 2 months after Project Phantasma was released in Japan, and came out in 2000 everywhere else. I played these games for the first time recently after holding it off for so long, until some recent news has finally given me an excuse to start them up. While technically standalone titles, Project Phantasma and Master of Arena are practically expansions, with each subsequent game being an expansion to the previous. You can transfer your save file over to the next game, all your acquired money and customizations, despite each game having different stories and protagonists. It makes the early parts of each of the next games easier, and even completely eliminates any possible grind that you might normally have to do. All the games play exactly the same too, so you'll always feel right at home with the gameplay when moving on. There's hardly a story to these games. In the manual, you can read a bit of lore and some detailed descriptions of the major players of the first game. Unfortunately, I don't have access to the second and third game's manual, so I don't know how much is explained in those. The plot of the first game is real simple. You're some talented guy who got recruited to a mercenary group, the Ravens, who take on any job so long as the pay is good, even if it means killing another Raven apparently. Then the whole game is just about you being hired by corporations trying to kill each other, paying you to fuck the other up, or defend against them. And then some big conspiracy thing gets revealed at the very end, in the worst level of the game. The story technically branches in this game and Master of Arena, but it doesn't change how the overall story plays out. There are also some little side jobs you could take for a little extra fun, as well as some cash-in items. The first expansion, Project Phantasma, is all about some other Raven guy, you, getting hired by someone who you busted out of prison, so you could take down some evil weapon project. The second expansion, Master of Arena, is about a guy who joined the Ravens just to search for his family's murderer. The one who recruits you claims to be able to lead you to the killer, and so you constantly take on jobs and fight in the arena under the informant's orders in order to eventually get closer to him. So the gist of all these stories is that, for all anyone knows, two of the protagonists just did everything they do simply because they saw the money involved, regardless of how much impact it might have on the rest of the world. Master of Arena at least gives you a revenge motive, although the revenge part of the story hardly goes anywhere, as you just take on missions and fight in the arena until you eventually face your killer, and then the game ends. However, Master of Arena does expand a little more on how the original Armored Core ended, and answered a few questions that left some stuff a mystery. None of the games teach you how to actually play. In the first game, as soon as you select New Game, you get thrown into an arena as part of a recruitment test against some robots. The two expansions just take you straight into the hub menu where you can go into a mission right away, or fuck around a bit with the optional stuff. If you've ever played any Kingsfield or Shadow Tower game, or Echo Knight game to an extent, then you'll get familiar with the controls pretty fast. Otherwise, it's going to take some getting used to. You have to go to the manual or control settings in the options menu just to know what each button does, or play around until you learn, I guess. They're not at all complicated, but I'm sure they'll be too weird for most people who can't fathom pre-DualShock days, as a friend of mine mentioned. Being able to customize your Armored Core unit is perhaps these games' best feature. The opening cinematic of the first game even showcases this. There is a surprisingly vast amount of customization options, especially for something out of the PS1. Before playing these games, I thought I was just going to be doing something like choose Mech A, Mech B, Mech C. Your customization options are, of course, extremely limited early on since you'll be way too poor to buy anything. Once you start amassing enough money, you'll be able to switch up different parts of your armor, your weapons, your lock-on mechanism. You can even replace your arms completely with gun or cannon arms, as well as replacing your legs for something with wheels instead. There are lightweight builds, medium, heavy, Metal Gear lookalikes. Maybe you prefer energy projectiles over actual bullets. Or maybe you want explosive weaponry instead, like grenades and rocket launchers. You can even have 2 or 3 different types of guns simultaneously, one on the arm and 2 on your shoulders. If you want, you can even ditch the idea of a mech altogether and just make something that looks more like an actual vehicle. A tank that can still boost vertically to go airborne for a bit. Even the color of your AC can be customized greatly too, which I didn't think was possible on a PS1 game. Maybe some other PS1 game had this level of customization, but this really surprised me. Once you think you've got an AC build you like going, you can go to the AC test chamber, or arena, to try your mech out at no cost.
Main system, engaging test mode.
Part of the idea for the customization, I think, is supposed to be that you're to build your AC mech until it best suits the mission you're about to take, or failed at because your build was too shit.
AC unit destroyed. Combat halted.
Maybe the lock-on range for the mechanism you installed was too narrow, or your current gun's projectile speed was too slow for the really obnoxious flying enemies. Lots of builds can actually take on literally anything the game throws at you, but of course player skill is a lot more reliant with those. Unfortunately, there are limits to the builds, namely weight and energy limits to keep your AC from being overpowered, I guess. The leg or torso parts you're using could be too weak to carry the heavier stuff you want, or your current equipment takes up more energy points than your current generator can handle. Customizing in and of itself too is a bit of a chore, if just because of the time these games came out in, I'd like to believe. There's no real convenient way to compare items between the shop and what you currently have equipped, unless you just have a real good memory, so you'll probably be coming in and out of specific menus a lot when swapping AC parts around. Real cool thing about the shop in these games though is that it's hardly considered a shop at all. You can buy and sell things at the exact same price as when you bought and sold them, making them just be a slightly more inconvenient second storage. You earn credits through the missions you get offered. You can't repeat missions to farm credits until you've beaten the game you're currently on. The way to lose money isn't necessarily to fail missions, but to always be using up solid ammo such as bullets and grenades, and having a very high AC repair cost constantly from taking too much damage. Energy weapons don't actually cost any credits to use, despite there being a visible limit. All that in mind, you can actually go into negative currency in the first game without a proper way to climb out. Sink into debt, in other words. One way to get out of that is to obviously do better enough in future missions to be making money again, but another way out is to amass a debt of 50,000 credits or more and then immediately fail a mission. What's really unique about that method is that you get rewarded for it with a permanent upgrade, part of the Human Plus mechanic, but you have to restart the game from the very beginning with your credits resetting to zero, though you get to keep everything you've purchased prior. You can actually do this a certain amount of times intentionally to get a lot stronger as a result. There's an extremely unique melee ability locked behind this mechanic, so it's kind of a shame for people who are good at the game and don't want the difficulty to permanently be lowered to acquire it. The missions themselves are generally pretty fun, but can get pretty dull and mindless. Objectives are usually simplistic, like just kill everything in sight, protect this, just go from A to B to get your reward, oftentimes with seemingly no real story significance until they abruptly throw it in. Their lengths can also range from as fast as finishing in 2 minutes to taking as long as 30 minutes because they want you to run around a maze or something. These ones are the most boring missions as they don't even contain any in-between story sections sometimes. The real satisfaction from doing the missions comes from when the AC you spent time customizing succeeds, at least.
Target achieved.
And when you transfer your AC to the next game, it does feel real good seeing it succeed there. To keep the missions from getting stale, you can always switch your build around every now and then. There's also really upbeat music that plays throughout most of the game to try and keep you pumped. Sometimes music doesn't play, and for some parts where it doesn't, it's really curious as to why, making them more boring than they should be.
Gate check. Cannot unlock gate.
Mission completion is only graded based on AC repairs and ammo cost. Abandoning the mission from the pause screen also deducts money from repairs and ammo spent, and counts the mission as a failure on your save file, unless you reload a prior one. Some of the more complicated missions can get really obnoxious, or at least the ones in Project Phantasma anyway. When they want you to do more than just go from A to B or destroy some specific thing, they often don't tell you enough details, so you either waste more time than you should, or you automatically fail somehow. Like, they want me to catch some vehicles before they reach the exit, but which path are they taking? Which tunnel exit is their exit? Should I bother with their guards that attack me right away?
Battle lost. System switched to normal mode.
The combat itself is actually just an extremely basic third-person shooter for the most part. You go forward or wait for enemies to get close enough for your lock-on thing to lock on, and then you shoot. At the same time, it consists of running and boosting from side to side, hoping that some bullets don't hit you while you're shooting back. With proper use of your boost, you can even make use of bunny hopping strats, even with heavy builds, to more easily dodge certain projectiles, or just travel faster without completely depleting your boost charge. The lock-on mechanic is often pretty obnoxious during regular missions. If there are multiple enemies, you'll either stay locked on to the first enemy within sight, or the closest with no good way to change targets. Within enclosed spaces, you're very likely to lock on to enemies behind walls, so if you're already fighting something in the current room, you're more than likely to lock onto the enemy you can't even see before the one in front of you. The extremely fast and/or airborne enemies are the most obnoxious in this game, as they'll constantly exit your lock-on range. They basically force you to use guns with faster projectile speeds against these mobile fucks because locking on doesn't necessarily mean guaranteed hits, even with homing attacks. Within the expansions feature the new Arena mode, a 1v1 mode where you're pitted against a selection of pre-built ACs in a stage of your choice. It's a very basic feature, but oddly fun, probably because the fights are almost always different from one another. It's a really good excuse to try out new builds without wasting money on a mission, aside from the AC test chamber, as failing these don't cost any money. The really late-game arena fights are absolute bullshit though, as just about every contender in the high ranks have the Human Plus upgrades, which make them ridiculously tough to deal with, needing you to resort to some bullshit strats of your own. In Project Phantasma, the arena was just an entirely optional feature that you can earn some money and extra AC parts from. In Master of Arena, it becomes part of the plot as well as a way to make a little extra money. Master of Arena comes with 2 discs, and disc 2 is exclusively for more arena stuff, so should you really get into this mode. The PS1 Armored Core games are pretty archaic. Good fun with the customization and seeing your work succeed, cool music, but it's a little hard to recommend due to the potentially dull missions, inconvenient menus, and control scheme that was originally meant for the much slower paced FromSoft games, when dual analog sticks were still an extremely new concept. I was kind of afraid of going into this series because I wasn't a huge fan of fast mechs, like Gundam and Zone of the Enders. But I was pretty surprised to see a nice balance that they achieved with having mechs that both feel extremely weighty and are capable of going fast, limited as some builds may be with their speed compared to the lightweights. It's part of the reason why I favored heavy builds for almost all of my time with these. The other reason was because I didn't think these controls suited fast-paced action. FromSoft being FromSoft, the Moonlight Blade from the Kingsfield series and many other future FromSoft games is here. Of course, it has the highest attack power out of any blade you could get. It's only available in the first game as a hidden item within one of the game's long missions, and available for purchase right away in Master of Arena, for people who couldn't find it in the past, I guess. If you really want to be that kind of guy, the first game also features a patches scenario, with the treasure bait, and a fucking poison section. Playtime for the first game was like 8 to 10 hours. The expansions are much shorter. Just from watching videos of the later games from the later generations, they look much smoother, so I'm really looking forward to getting to at least most of those in the near future. If you can handle the datedness, the original Armored Core Trilogy are pretty alright games.